All right, guys. So the play-in stage at Worlds is meant to give a little bit of exploration, allow teams to really calibrate, understand, get a feel for what the meta is. And I think this game is quite the example of this, where you can clearly see that teams have such different takes on what's good, and in contrast to the first game I did, where you know Mad Lions versus Vikings, it was just clear that Mad Lions had a better take on what things to prioritize in the overall meta in terms of what 14-18 has to offer. And you would expect a lot of these picks to kind of carry over to this game, but hell no. That shit went straight out the window, and we got the Wild West out of drafting in this case. I was trying to make some sense out of what was happening, but in some of these games, it was quite the struggle, I would say. And, there's a couple of themes we can use, fundamentals in drafting, to kind of give some insight as to why certain picks make sense. But man, I think, I usually don't. I like to give opinions on, not opinions, give context as to why a team would make a certain pick. But man, it's really hard to kind of grasp at straws for some of them. And it actually, I would think, negatively detracts to the over quality of the draft in this case. And I think you can kind of tell that, in my opinion, both teams were making some mistakes in these drafts. And to start off, some of them were okay, but some of the picks were okay in general. But you can kind of see some glimpses of does that really make sense though? And it kind of starts off with this hella raw dog R1 Yone pick. What it seems to be is the standard for, at least for mid lane, is the big handshake between Orianna and Syndra. At least that's what teams are willing to do, because it's a very safe pick, and both of these champions are not too bad in the game state at the moment. I do think that other champions can be explored in the meta right at this time. I almost am certain that there's Ori, Syndra are going to be good. Azir probably not. It usually has the third fiddle to this, but I can definitely see other champions being more prominent as we've moved into a more potentially aggressive meta, with the entire jungle meta being nuked, and creating just a much faster game pace. And there's a lot more aggressive bottom lanes that are on the table as well. So Yone, Sejuani, R1, R2, in a combo, it's not that bad. It's actually provides decent forward. If it's very comfort for Pain Gaming, then it is what it is. They're willing to go for it, and they're not too worried about the poor matchups if both Ori and Syndra are gone. But it gets even crazier that I think Pain almost get rewarded a little bit with this pick, because both of these teams are picking champions that are really low execution and have been pretty much nerfed to the ground. I would say more so on the PSG side. Pain is kind of it's painful to see that they can just get away with a raw dog Yone pick, whereas PSG kind of give it to them almost with picking champions that are just so much weaker than they used to be. On paper, then you go back a couple patches, and the Tristana is it's a really great pick, and be able to suppress this Yone in the early phases, and maybe gives PSG a chance to transition. But the champ's 42 win rate now. It's nothing like it used to be. It doesn't have the same pressure like it used to be, and same with the Rumble. It's just it doesn't have the same oomph. And I do think that both of these champions are probably going to go out. We saw no priority on. If you note in the other games, Mad Lions have put a big emphasis on things like Sante Open, the Jinx Open. Look how low Poppy priority is in this game as well. It would be a disgusting pick against almost all of these champs, and both teams are letting it go straight open, and they're going for champions that they just feel can work with based on the context that they've been given. The MF is another one. I honestly am just kind of confused. This has to be just a different meta read from PSG, and in my opinion, a pretty incorrect one. To be honest with you, she's been a lot weaker as well. And you could just go for safer picks. You can go Kai'Sa here, you can go Jinx, you can go Jhin, even Draven's not that bad here. And it's just really weird that they're just picking things that are really, really weak this patch. And it's a little bit strange how Pain are allowed to just pick stronger things and raw dog a lot of things and just get away with it. So that's why in this game it's kind of a feeler. I think for both of these teams, it's a feeler match for understanding what's going back to the drawing board and understanding, okay, what needs to change in terms of what we think here. I think there's a lot of champions here that are left on the table and could be explored more and even ordered differently. If Pain, I'm actually okay with Pain going for a 1-2 Lucian Nami if they were going to go for something like this anyway, and it increases the value of things like the Yone, right? A lot of like the orders and draft and like what people are prioritizing and what makes sense and what counters, it doesn't add up too much in this case, and that's kind of like that's a good reason why we can use these wildcard play-in stages as an example. Both teams are also really allergic to Aurora, apparently, because they're just perma-banning on red side. In the other series so far, no team even cared. And it's just like a completely 180 from the way these teams are drafting, right? But PSG is opted for Skarner Open on B1 both times, and which I actually do agree with. And because if you think about it, it doesn't really show too much in terms of like how you want to play the game and your cards that you want to play. And I think if I were to guess, with the based on the field available of champions, right? Most AD carries, there's some aggressive picks, but a lot of them, there's a lot of options for front to back at the moment in terms of both support options, top options, very front to backy. Jungle has more flexible options in terms of how they would like to play, but the champion that comes to mind is just Poppy. Maybe I'm just allergic to this champ, and I think it's like the best champ in the game right now. But it would basically fulfill a similar role to the Skarner in terms of being able to create space like that. But it's triple flex in 3 roles. It's a great counter pick, weak side into things like the Cassante. You can flex it to support if you wanted to. You can counter things like the Nautilus and the Leona and even the Rel. You can counter most of the junglers as well. It just suppresses so much, and I think I continue to think that it's going to be one of the most prominent picks in this meta. It's just completely slipping through at the moment. So that's one. And I think AD carry openers are not as common as I thought they would be as well. Like, I think Jinx B1 should be pretty common in this case by giving you as many options as possible. But teams like Pain are just going for Yone R1 every game instead. So it's I think it's like teams are just not adapting enough in a meta like to cater pick against what the enemies are showing, and in a meta where you have the most options possible. In the previous meta before this, it was there was not much flexibility in terms of like, there's a couple picks that are like, all right guys, these are the best champs, you better pick them. Like, I don't know, if you're not going Corki Trust mid, this is it, like you're gonna lose. But this is not that kind of meta, and I think there's so many different things that people should be going for. So sorry, a little bit of a rant there, but overall, I think this could be just how both teams like to play, and they're focusing on picking things that are just very comfortable for them. And in the second game, although like the priorities are a little bit requiring of some calibration, the fundamentals are a little bit better because we have the Akali matchup into the Yone. We're picking counterpick. We have the clearance for the Jhin pick on 4-5, and they're actually pushing the Jhin late enough in order to actually make it work. Like they're doing the proper cash out for picking AD carry later. Otherwise, you would pick it earlier. You could pick Lucian. You could pick Kai'Sa. In my opinion, I think that those two champions are pretty viable in this meta. Jinx is always available at any point, and it kind of looks like a good cleanup from the last time. It's not that they have a good read on what's specifically good. They just know that given that Pain Gaming revealed this, we can pick this in this scenario, and they get rewarded for it. And I think that's why they are able to get a more favorable draft in this case. The first one was a little rough to say the least. I think all these champs are hot ass, I'm not going to lie. So good recovery there. And then Pain Gaming, I think you're not allowed to pick Yone blind like that twice in a row. So I think as a good punishment. It's so much so that they end up banning the Skarner, actually. And okay, now we're forced into a scenario where another dynamic could be, it could be the Orianna Syndra trades, or you choose to go for something else in order to create a different lane dynamic against this. I'm not 100% sure on what teams are going to decide on in terms of what matchups are the best and what champions are the best in order to counter this. There's a lot of decent options that I could see depending on what teams are willing to play. And so let's say, for example, I think LeBlanc is pretty strong right now. Untested though, obviously really weak into the Poppy, but we're unsure. Ariana's obviously good here. Gallo's really strong in the patch, but I'm not really sure if he's very useful in an environment like Worlds. He usually isn't because of the fact that he can fall off so hard and teams can exploit him. But these are things that I'd like to see teams explore, and I think there's a lot of there's a lot of options available. Like I wouldn't be surprised at all if I see like Hui Zoe come back as well. If there's such an emphasis on things like the Poppy that might come up, as well as the front to back champions that come up, it could be a siege fest. And in order to counter that, it completely wraps around when you go for these forward comps again. Like that's why they buff champions, or that's why they kept champions like Lucian Kai'Sa very strong. In this case, that's not happening too much, and teams are just going for whatever, and they're okay with that. And I think, as these picks are basically rounded out, I think people are going to realize how the other teams like that are coming to the main event are going to realize what champions work and what champions didn't. And that's pretty much how it goes with this one. I think overall though, the drafting is, I would say, pretty weird and messy overall, and I think it's fine for both of these teams because it was such a massive patch. Like 14-18 was probably one of the biggest patches I've seen in years, like changing like 30-40 champions, and I believe they changed some other stuff as well, and like the whole feel of the game was completely changed, right? It's as fat as like a mid-season update, to be honest with you, when you're cycling that many champions in and out, and the play styles are going to naturally change. So I do like the aggressiveness from both teams as well. PSG going for the Vayne on 5. I think my pet peeve is most definitely when teams don't really try to go for an aggressive pick when they see the angle for it, and I do appreciate the fact that they go for it here. And while I don't think the overall grasp on the meta is there, I would say more so that I like the spice that it provides, and that is the name of the game here, right? At least it looks exciting. That's the fun part. I don't care if the drafts make sense as much, as long as you're having a good time. And I think with these drafts, you're probably gonna have a good time, right? And you know what? That could be what it's about. It's just playing out of your mind and being able to just win. And who needs good fundamentals when you have good hands?